There are only two books inside of the New Testament that speak about Jesus' birth. That would be the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, and they're completely contradictory in nature. Matthew and Luke share only one common denominator, and that's that they both want Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, the city of David, and they also want him to spend time inside of Nazareth. Why? The historical Jesus was most likely from Nazareth, and he became known as Jesus of Nazareth. So they had to combine these two elements somehow and give you a story about a baby that was born in Bethlehem and Jesus of Nazareth. The way they did it was completely different from each other. Over in Matthew has the couple, Mary and Joseph, starting out their life in Bethlehem, and Jesus is born inside of a house because they were at home. Luke, on the other hand, has the married couple starting off their life in Nazareth, and they have to travel to Bethlehem. So he crafts a story of some kind of nonsensical census that sends them back to Bethlehem. But because they're not native to Bethlehem, they have to go looking for a place to stay. And the inn is full. So what do? They stay in the barn. Baby Jesus is born in a manger. This is completely contradictory to what we find in the book of Matthew. Let's head back over to Matthew. In Matthew's version, after Jesus is born, Herod goes on a killing spree, and in order to escape this, Mary, Jesus, and Joseph have to flee to the land of Egypt, and they stay there until after Herod dies. And when they want to come back, they realize, oh, Herod Archelaus, Herod's son, his crazy child, is still in Judea, so we better not go back there. So they head up to the Galilee region and find a home in Nazareth. Now, going back to the book of Luke. In the book of Luke, there's no story of Herod killing babies, so the family stays put. They don't have to go running anywhere. Jesus has his circumcision on the 8th day, and around a month later, Mary heads over to the temple and she brings obligatory sacrifices after giving birth. They're not running anywhere. There's no killing. They're there in the land of Israel. No Egypt, nothing. Through these two very different stories, Matthew and Luke both have them in Bethlehem and Nazareth, though they have exactly the opposite story. Luke starts off in Nazareth, ends up in Bethlehem. Matthew starts out in Bethlehem and ends up in Nazareth. Then you have details like Matthew's version has magi's, whereas Luke's version has shepherds. Here's another big one. Matthew places his nativity story during the reign of Herod, who died in 4 BCE. Luke, on the other hand, places Jesus' birth during the reign of Quirinius, which began in 6 of the Common Era. Stop and think about this. This is a 10-year discrepancy. Jesus could not have been born at the same time that Herod and Quirinius were reigning. It's simply not possible. Most Christians aren't aware of these discrepancies, and it all becomes one big mush inside of their mind. But let's make this even more interesting. Why were Matthew and Luke the only ones to tell us a story about a virgin birth? Why did Paul and Mark leave this out? Why did John leave it out? This goes back to the way each of them wanted to present their christologies. According to Paul, Jesus only became God's son at the resurrection. And according to Mark, Jesus only became God's son after he was baptized. Matthew and Luke want to raise the Christology, so they have him becoming divine before his birth. John, on the other hand, wants to raise the Christology even further, and he wants Jesus to be from the eternity past, so he doesn't speak about Jesus' birth at all. Why might Matthew and Luke have wanted to invent this virgin birth narrative? Your mind has to be in tune with the Greco-Roman world in order to understand this. In the Greco-Roman world, everybody powerful was born to a virgin, basically. You had Hercules, you had Apollo, you had Romulus, you had Alexander the Great. Everybody who possessed some kind of smidgen of power, somebody who accomplished more than the average human being, was thought to be a demigod. And it was thought that they couldn't be, born to a regular human being. They had to be born to a woman who was impregnated by a god. This was very common in the Greco-Roman world. Christianity is a religion that has always sought converts. Paul first was able to attract converts by doing away with the law. Matthew and Luke up this game by saying, oh, there's a virgin who gave birth. This was the way to attract the pagan mind. Now, there's one more thing about these different Christologies that I spoke about and about the pagan mindset. If you go back and you actually read the New Testament, not putting your Trinity filter upon it, you will actually find that none of the New Testament writers believed Jesus to be on the same level as God the Father. Even in John, which has the highest Christology, Jesus is saying the Father is greater than I. All throughout the New Testament, you're going to find Jesus praying to God the Father. You're going to find that he's in obedience to God the Father. He's subordinate to God the Father. That's because in the Greco-Roman world, there were multi-tiers of godship. The upper tier God didn't really have much to do with the lower worlds. That's why there were demiurges, demigods, man-gods, intermediaries, people who were in between the upper tier God and humankind. The myth of Jesus being a man-god likely began with a charismatic cult personality who gained a following when people were desperate for a Messiah-like figure. And over time, layers and layers of mythology were accumulated and theologies were added, and people began to believe different things. You only got to the Trinity as we know it now after years and years and years of Christianity refining their theology, changing it, morphing it. At the end of the day, all of the Christian theologies, whether they come from the hand of Paul or from modern-day Christian writers, all of them are opposed by the God of Israel, who said in Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10, "Before me no God was formed, and after me no God shall be." There is nobody aside from God. He is the only Savior.